Welcome back to Zakima's Ridge Homestead. Today's video is another one of our Community of 8 Preparedness Group classes. Today we're going to show the proper way to mount a rifle scope. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, and welcome to our channel. We're glad you're here.
Alright, today we're going to be learning how to properly mount an optic, and then once we're done mounting the optics, we're going to go out and we're going to zero the optics. Today we have a fantastic AR-15 from our community leader, and a Strike Eagle that we're going to be mounting to it with the cantilever one-piece rings. We're going to go over step by step what I'm doing and why, some basic torque specs on these, but remember, always refer to your manufacturer torque specs whenever you're going to mount anything on anything, because different manufacturers have different specs and everything. So just because the Vortex cantilever mount says 18 inch-pounds on top and 30 inch-pounds on the side doesn't mean that your other one's going to have something different. But either case, couple of safety things, obviously. Anytime you're working with firearms, always verify that you have no ammunition on the table. Firearms always unloaded, nothing in the chamber, nothing going on. Always maintain proper muzzle discipline, all that good stuff. So, first thing we're going to talk about is selection of components. When you have scopes, you have to first determine what kind of scope you want for what purpose. This one's just going to be a general purpose home defense and critter rifle. It's more of a backup rifle than anything, so we're just going to mount a regular 1 to 6 second focal plane to it. We're not planning on using anything past 200, 300 yards. The hunting scopes and stuff that you might put on things, they're going to require a little bit different consideration as to your yardages and what types of things you need to do with your scope, whether or not you're going to be running thermals with it, or night vision, or what have you, or anything else that you're doing with it, and your mounting platform. Obviously, ARs are pretty easy because we have a flat, continuous top, so we can use the one-piece cantilevers, one-piece mounts. You can use separate rings, but there's no reason to when you have a nice, convenient mounting system for basically any AR platform. Once you select your optic and your mount, you got to make sure you're worried about the cross compatibility of them. You got to remember that you have 3 basic size tubes going around. You got the 1 inch, the 30 millimeter, and the 34 millimeter tubes are the basic ones going around. There's obviously different ones out there as well, but make sure you get the right hardware for your scope. Some scopes come with the hardware, some scopes don't. So if you get something with a 1 inch tube, make sure you're getting a 1 inch tube rings, not the 30 millimeter or the 34 millimeter. It's a common mistake that I see a lot of people that are unfamiliar with firearms and buying stuff for the first time. They get it and they realize, oh, I got the wrong thing. I got to send that back in and get another one. Just save you some time and convenience. So you're going to want a nice level platform. It can be, here we have a counter in the kitchen. It can be a workbench. It can be anything as long as you can make sure that you can level it. Now, the surface itself doesn't necessarily need to be level as long as you have something that you can level it with. And here we have this fancy gun vise that has 4 independent leveling screws that allows us to level the vise. So we're just going to verify that it's level this way with a regular bubble level. And it is. And we're going to verify that it's level this way. And it's level there. And it's level there. So we have a level vise right here. We've already made sure that it's clear and everything. We're going to do it again, just to make sure. We're going to put it in here. We're going to try to situate it in such a way that we can grab it and level it. So I have a 3-way level that I like to line up to the Picatinny system so I can see that it's level both forward and back and left and right. kind of pushing it up. There we go. You want it pretty secure so that while you're messing with it and putting the scope on it and everything, you don't have any kind of issues, which is kind of fun. I have a completely separate vise at home that I normally use, so I'm a little unfamiliar with this one. And right there, we're level on forward and back, and we're level side to side. Now, you're going to want some kind of reference point while you're going. I use the Wheeler scope leveling kit that comes with 2 bubble levels. Once you have your upper level and you verify that it's level, which this is a little bit more precise than the basic level that I use to do a rough level. So I got a little bit of minor adjustments to do. I'm going to use the barrel level over here, attach it to the barrel, and you're going to sync it up with the level that you have on your rail. And once you have it synced up, you're going to tighten it down, and that's going to be your reference point for directly over your center bore axis and your level there. So then, in order to get a proper idea of where you want to put your base, whoever the end user is going to be of the firearm, you should have them hold it, put their face up to it, and have a proper cheek weld, a comfortable cheek weld, and then take either painter's tape or masking tape or something to mark where their eye sits on their stock. And that's going to give you a reference point of where you're going to want to draw your eye relief, which your eye relief is different for every scope and every manufacturer. For Strike Eagles, I think it's 3.4 or 3.6 inches, but for every scope it's different, whether it's 5 to 25 primary arms or a 5 to 25 vortex and different types of vortexes, whether it's the Strike Eagle or the Viper or the Razor. They're all going to have different eye reliefs, and you have to make sure you measure the eye relief. And what the eye relief is it basically controls your scope shadow. As long as you're in that proper eye relief area, no matter what magnification you put it on, you shouldn't experience a significant amount of scope shadow. And scope shadow is when you take your face away or bring your face closer, that viewing window inside the scope gets bigger or smaller, and it makes it look kind of cattywampus. So you want to make sure that wherever your cheek weld is going to be on that rifle, you have that proper cheek weld. Now once we have this on there, since this is going to be like a universal rifle for any random person to pick up and use, we're just going to do a generic one. Obviously they're going to have to adjust the stock and do what they need to do to get their proper eye relief to that scope, since it's not going to be made for a specific individual. But if it's your rifle, you're going to want to measure yourself on that rifle. So we're just going to, as a general rule of thumb, I like to go 2 Picatinny rail notches from the end. And we're just going to set it there. And you want to push your mount forward into the Picatinny rail. That way it sits there nice and pretty. Then we're going to set this
20.
to 20. This one's 20 apparently, not 30 like I had originally thought. Different ones are different. The vortex that I just did last week was much heavier than 20.
It was 40 or 50.
It was like, it was almost 60. It was 58 or something. And it depends on, even if the manufacturer's the same, it depends on the model and everything. So what I'm doing right now is I'm backing out all these screws to be roughly the same. Maybe a little bit more. I'm going to put a teeny tiny dab of VC3 thread locker in it. I like to use VC3 because it's semi-permanent. You guys have paper towels that I can use napkin. It's not a permanent thread locker. It's a semi-permanent thread locker. And it's going to hold it from vibrations and everything and stop it from backing out. In theory, as long as you have good torque and are to the proper torque specs, you shouldn't have to worry about it too much. But this gives you just that extra little bit of security. And you just need a tiny little bit in between the threads. You don't need to glob it on. You don't need to put a whole lot. As long as it's wet, it'll be malleable. But once it dries, it's going to kind of crystallize and expand. So you don't want to use it on your rings once we get to your rings. But you do want to use it on your base. And for this one, our goal is to try to get this lens right here just beyond the charging handle. So on this particular firearm, we do have to go to that last Picatinny spot so that it's just over that charging handle. We're going to come over here, squeeze this in, pull forward on it. As you screw these in, you're going to screw them snug first. Going between them. You don't want to do them all in a straight line. You want to kind of do one and the other. And then snug them all up. Then once they're all snugged up, you're going to tighten them. I like to go 3 clicks on your torque wrench at the specified weight, because that just verifies that it's actually at that weight. Then I'm going to verify my level on these, which for some lower end or lower brand one-piece kits or rings, they might not be perfectly level, and that's okay. But you want them somewhere near level, because then it's normally an indication that it's not sitting on the rail right for some reason. Once we verify that they're level compared to the bore axis, which they are on both sides, we're good. Now, let's assume you don't have a nice single-piece precision cantilever mount or single-piece mount that's reliable, and you don't know if the rings are lined up properly. I didn't bring it with me because we were going to be using a single piece AR as an example, but there are scope mounting kits that can verify your runout and verify your ring concentricity by getting tubes that go on each one of your rings, which obviously on the one piece mount it doesn't make sense, but on 2 separate rings that you have, especially if you're mounting them to a hunting rifle with 2 different mounts that you have to put in manually, you can see how far off your rings are center to center. And if you're too far off center to center, it's going to cause warpage in your scope. And if it warps your scope, you're not going to have consistent adjustments, and you're not going to have consistent point of impact compared to where you're aiming at different distances. So in order to combat that, you would need to do what's called lapping your rings. So first you would test them with your tubes, and you put them in there, and then they come to a point. And as long as those points are pointing directly at each other, you're good to go. If they're askew or off or at an angle, that means you have to lap your rings, and it comes with a kit where it has the different size tubes, whether it's 1 inch, 30 millimeter, 34, that you put the lapping compound on it, and you just run it through there just a little bit. And then you wipe everything down, and you retest it. And then if it's still off, you run it a little bit. And you keep going until your rings are true. And once they're true, and those 2 points are pointing at each other, that means once you clamp your scope down to the proper torque specs, you're not going to have any tension on your tube, and you're not causing any stress inside your scope. Because because there's a series of glass in here in your different lenses, and if you have tension on them, it'll warp over time, and as it warps over time, it'll change your perception through that scope and change where that bullet's going based off where you think it's going, because you're going to be aiming at something that you're not actually aiming at. Kind of like how water bends light, it's going to bend it through that lens because that lens became warped. It's not going to be noticeable, except you're going to be shooting 5-6 inches left or right of your target at 500-600 yards. You're going to be like, I don't understand why I'm not hitting this thing when I hit it 2 years ago. So you don't want to do that. We're going to go ahead and mount this scope. Now, some people will use kind of like an abrasive tape or an abrasive compound inside of your rings to keep your scope where it's supposed to be once you mount it. I don't like doing that. You don't necessarily need it as long as you have it torqued down properly. Some people are just used to the old school scopes and scope rings that are a little bit less precise than modern manufacturing. Back when you had to have that abrasive substance and that abrasiveness to hold the scope in place. But as long as you're using modern equipment with modern mounting kits and modern scopes, everything is machined within such tight tolerances that as long as you're clamping it down to the proper poundage, it's not going to go anywhere either way. I've dropped my scopes head first onto the side of cars and stuff and never had them lose their zero, and I've never used that compound or that tape because I never felt the need for it. Some people will put like an adhesive in there, like a kind of like a sticky tacky adhesive. I still don't see a huge need for that. So we're just going to start by figuring out where we want this thing. Now, like I said, at this point, if this was for you as an individual and you're mounting it for yourself to use for hunting or home defense or what have you, you would have that tape marked here to where exactly your eye relief would be. You would take a tape measure from your lens, and if this was rated at a 3.4 inch eye relief, you would measure 3.4 inches from there to there. And that should be your ideal eye relief for your cheek weld. For this, it's going to be a universal scope that anyone's going to be able to pick up and use. We're just going to put a generic eye relief on here, which would be right about just behind the charging handle, is where I typically like to put it. That way they can adjust the stock however they need to. Whether they're tall or short or have long arms or short arms, they can get themselves off that scope pretty much as they need to in order to have that proper eye relief. Because that's going to be up to whoever picks up the scope at the time to figure out what eye relief they need. So at this time, this one's a little back heavy. There we go. We're going to have this sitting right here. We're going to have this sitting right here. With these less expensive cantilever mounts, it shouldn't matter that much whether your front ring and your back rings get mixed up. When you get into the higher end ones like the spurs and the precision ring sets, you're going to want to make sure you have the matching rings in the correct orientation wherever they are, because they've been matched to such specific tolerances that you need to have the rear one mounted to the rear mounting ring facing in the right direction in order to maintain that tolerances that you want and that proper grip that you want for those precision rings. So I'm going to take my screws, I'm going to put them all on a paper towel, and then I'm going to get some regular blue Loctite. Why don't you use the VC3? Well, like I said, as the VC3 dries, it crystallizes and expands. You don't want that in your screws that's holding your scope, because if you torque it down to 18 inch-pounds and you're using the VC3 and it hardens and expands, all of a sudden your screws are either backing out or getting tighter. If they're getting tighter, then you've exceeded your 18 inch-pounds, and that can cause undue strain on the tube, which can cause warping of your lens and all kinds of other issues. So we don't want to do that. So we're just going to use regular Loctite. And it just takes a little drop. Not very much at all. In fact, this is coming out more than I would like it to. It doesn't need to be a whole heck of a lot. And we're going to very, very gently just start these in here. We're not even going to go snug yet, we're just starting them. Because we are going to orient the scope before we start tightening these. Now, as I'm tightening these, some people ask, well, why go through this whole process when you can just slap a red dot on there or a 1x prism scope and not have to really worry about eye relief and proper mounting and bullet drop and all that good stuff if you're going to be shooting under 600 yards. And that's a fair point. But we're up here in Ohio, we have some large open fields, we have some close areas. If you're going to be using this in a defensive situation, you don't know if you're going to be taking 10-yard shots or 300-yard shots, or if you're going to be taking care of coyotes on your property. If you're just going to be making an all-purpose rifle, the LPVO is the way to go, low-powered variable optic. And when you're doing the low-powered variable optics, since they do have magnification, they do have zoom, and they do have built-in ballistics compensations and bullet drop compensators, you need to make sure that you have it properly aligned and properly level for those to work. Because if you're zeroing it at the distance that it recommends for your ballistics, your drop, for let's say a 223 in this case, and you don't have it properly aligned, you try to take something out at 400 or 500 yards, you're probably going to miss it completely if you have your scope all cockeyed and not in center line with your bore axis, which is not something that anyone wants to do. So, I'm going to put the bubble level on top of the top turret of the scope, and I'm going to orient it to my reference level that I have on the barrel. And as best you can, you want this to be as horizontal 90 degrees to that scope as possible. It looks like we're just about perfect there. We're going to keep that there. We're going to set this to our 18, this one's 18 inch-pounds. And then I'm going to start snugging up first. Starting at one corner of one ring and going until I can no longer easily screw it down. And the next one, I'm going to go across. Keep going until I can no longer screw it down. Now, as you go through this process, it's normal for this bubble to move. But here's the deal. Once you're done securing it, it should still be level. So if you move it however much screwing that one down, you should be moving it the same amount screwing this one down, and vice versa. That's why we're going crisscross across each one. Because now that I've done these two across from each other, I'm going to come do this one. Just snug. I'm going to do this one, across from it, just snug. And I'm going to come back across here, do it again, just snug, go across, kind of like doing lug nuts on a car. Alright, now we're all snugged up. We're going to verify our level, which we're still level. So now I'm going to start tightening. And this is when you have to pay attention to how much it moves the bubble. Because if we're moving the bubble too much, by the time you're done, it's not going to be level anymore. You're going to have to take it all apart and start all over. And that sucks. So far we're doing good. Make sure. And we're still level. We're going to go to each one of these and just do one click to make sure. One. That's why I can't have nice things. All right. And we're still level. Good. So, in theory, we should have a reticle in here that's lined up perfectly with the bore axis, as long as you kept everything level and everything in line the way it's supposed to be. Made sure everything was level throughout the process and stayed level throughout the entire process. But how do I verify that? So, there's several ways you can verify that. The most reliable way is to go out into a field somewhere, tie a rope or a string from a tree, put a weight on the bottom of it, level this on a bench, and then hold that reticle over it while the gun itself is level. And you're going to line it up, your reticle, to the actual rope hanging from the tree itself. That's the plumb bob method. And you know that it's vertical because of gravity. And you know that this is level because you have it hooked up with a bunch of bubble levels. So you know that that reticle is in line with this bore axis, and it's perfectly vertical to that rope that's hanging 50, 60 yards downrange. If you're in your house, you don't have something like that, you can use a vertical line that you level across the room or in some other way, and you can either physically look through the scope, or you can use what's called the flashlight method. Today we're going to try the flashlight method, which hopefully will work, even though it's very bright in here. We're going to see if we can get it dark enough to use the flashlight method. So give us a minute while we organize it to the point where we can use that method. Alright, so we have it set up to get the room slightly darker. We have our vertical line over here on a safe across the room, and we're going to demonstrate how to use the flashlight method. So I have this rifle. It's still leveled. It's 100% leveled still from the scope mounting. And I'm just going to take a regular flashlight of reasonable intensity, and I'm just going to shine it through the scope. And as I shine it through the scope, you're going to see the reticle hopefully appear. If I can get it just at the right angle. That will help a little bit. And it's going to appear on that paper. Try this one. There we go. So, as we can see, that vertical line that we've already leveled earlier is going straight through that center dot, and that line from the reticle itself is going straight up and down across that vertical line, which means that we have confirmed that that reticle is 100% in line and level with the bore of this rifle. At this point, once we've verified that the axis of the scope is center in line and level with the center axis of your bore, it's ready to go out to the range and get zeroed.
Well, I hope you found that video about mounting rifle scopes enjoyable and informative. Our next video will be actually taking the rifle to the range and doing the zeroing process. I hope to catch you in that video as well.